The Grand Galactic Council was the most powerful governing body in the known universe. Within its vast halls, thousands of species had gathered, their voices echoing through the chamber, their words deciding the fate of entire civilizations. Today, however, there was no debate. There was no argument. Today there was only laughter. And at the center of it all, standing alone before the gathered masses, was a single human. The subject of the joke. Ambassador Elias Carter stood at the central podium, his expression unreadable as the assembled aliens erupted into laughter once more. It had been going on for several minutes now. Mockery, jeers, scorn. And it was all directed at him. He had expected disdain. He had expected suspicion. But he had not expected this. This is a joke, yes? Came the deep, guttural voice of Prime Warlord Drath of the Krell Dominion, his massive, armor-clad form shaking with amusement. Surely, the humans do not actually believe they are worthy of a seat on this council. Another bout of laughter followed, louder than before. Elias remained silent. Waiting. Watching. The Krell were not the only ones laughing. Across the chamber, representatives from the Vielith Empire, the Sulvar clans, the Dominion of Arkuin, and dozens of other species sneered at him with open contempt. The humans had come to request entry into the Grand Galactic Council, and the galaxy had found the very idea hilarious. The words that cut deep. High Chancellor Varnith of the Vielith leaned forward, his reptilian eyes glinting with amusement. Human, he said, his voice smooth and condescending. You are asking for the same rights as the Krell, the Sulvar, the highborn houses of the Dominion, and yet you bring nothing of value. He gestured lazily toward the assembled species. We are the titans of this galaxy. We shape the stars. We command fleets that have ruled the void for millennia. A murmur of agreement swept through the chamber. Varnitha's lips curled. And what do you bring? He leaned back in his chair, feigning curiosity. Tell us, human, what do your people have? Silence. All eyes turned to Elias, waiting, daring him to answer. The question that demanded an answer. Elias exhaled slowly. He had known this was coming. The arrogance of the galaxy's great powers was legendary. They viewed humanity as an anomaly, an upstart species barely out of their home system. And in truth, they were right. Humanity was young. Humanity had no great fleets. Humanity had no ancient legacy. So what did they have? Elias lifted his gaze. And when he finally spoke, his words would shake the galaxy forever. The speech that changed everything. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply spoke. You ask what humanity brings to this council. His voice was calm. What we have that none of you do. He stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. And the answer is simple. Pause. And then, we do not know how to kneel. The laughter stopped. Instantly, the chamber fell into an eerie silence, as if the air itself had been sucked from the room. The unspoken truth. Elias's gaze swept across the assembled leaders. You mock us because we are young? He nodded. You mock us because we are small? Another nod. But tell me, O great rulers of the stars? His eyes hardened. Which of you has ever won your freedom? The chamber was silent. Not a single voice spoke. Elias pressed forward. The Krell were born into war, bred for battle, but they have never fought to free themselves. Their empire was handed down by warlords before them. The massive Krell general stiffened, his amusement gone. Elias turned. The Vielith claim to be the oldest species in this chamber, yet they have never been anything other than rulers. The Vielith chancellor's eyes narrowed. Elias's voice rose slightly. Which of you has ever known chains? Pause. And which of you has broken them? The weight of the words. The council shifted uneasily. They had not expected this. No one had ever spoken to them like this before. Elias's next words cut even deeper. Humanity was never given an empire. His voice was steady. We were never handed power. We were never chosen as rulers. We have fought for every inch of ground we have ever claimed. He stepped forward again. We crawled out of the dirt and built cities. We tore ourselves apart in war and rebuilt stronger. Every battle we have fought alone. And yet, his eyes burned. And yet we have never bowed. The silence was deafening. That is what we bring. Elias let the words hang in the air. That is what makes us different. He exhaled, his voice turning dangerous. And that is why you fear us. The fear they could not admit. For all their laughter, for all their mockery, the greatest powers in the galaxy were afraid. Because they had never known struggle. Never known what it meant to fight for survival. But humanity? Humanity was born in fire. And there was nothing more terrifying than an enemy that refused to kneel. The vote that should have been impossible. For a long moment no one spoke. Then, I support their admission. The voice came from the far side of the chamber. A species that had remained silent until now. The Zifri ascendancy. The murmurs started instantly. Then another voice. I second the motion. The murmurs became shouts. More voices rose. And then, let them in. The impossible happened. The Grand Galactic Council, the greatest governing body in the known universe, had accepted humanity, not because of their fleets, not because of their power, but because of a single man's words. Words that shook the galaxy to its core. The chamber was in chaos. The Grand Galactic Council, once a symbol of absolute authority, was now fractured. Some species had stood with humanity, recognizing what Elias Carter's words truly meant. Others had fallen into stunned silence, unable to process how a species as young as humanity had forced them to confront a truth they had ignored for millennia. And then there were those who refused to accept it. The rage of the Dominion. A massive figure rose from his seat, his shadow stretching across the chamber. Prime Warlord Drath of the Krell Dominion. His eyes burned with fury, his massive armored form radiating hostility. His voice boomed like thunder. You expect us to believe that this fledgling race deserves a seat among us? His claws flexed, scraping the war table before him. You are insects. You have no fleets, no history, no victories worthy of this council. The murmurs grew louder. Some agreed. Others hesitated. But Elias? He did not flinch. Instead he stepped forward, his voice calm. Do we threaten you, Warlord? The question sent a ripple through the room. Drath's mandibles twitched. What? Elias's expression was unreadable. If we are so weak, if we are so insignificant, why do we unsettle you? Drath stiffened. The room grew tense. Elias's voice lowered. Could it be that it is not our weakness that frightens you? He let the words linger. But the possibility that we are not weak at all? A murmur swept through the chamber. Because for the first time, someone had spoken the unspoken fear. The Dominion had fought wars for centuries. They had never feared a new species before. Until now. And that fear? It was growing. The warning from the shadows. As the council descended into heated debate, Elias felt it. A presence. A cold, calculating gaze locked onto him. He turned just slightly, his eyes sweeping the darker corners of the chamber. And then he saw them. A delegation that had not spoken at all. A species that most in the room preferred to ignore. The Vernari Collective. Unlike the Krell Dominion or the Vielith, the Vernari were not conquerors. They were something far worse. Manipulators. A race that had never needed to wield weapons. Because they controlled those who did. The Vernari rarely spoke in public debates. They did not need to. Their influence was felt, not heard. And yet, one of them was watching Elias now. Intently. As if measuring him. As if deciding something. Elias met the gaze without hesitation. And then, the Vernari delegate smiled. It was a subtle thing. A small, unreadable smirk. But it was enough. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. Because that was not the look of a rival. It was the look of a predator recognizing another predator. And for the first time since stepping into this chamber, Elias realized that humanity had far more enemies than they had ever imagined. The vote that changed everything. Enough. The voice of High Chancellor Varnith cut through the room. The Vielith leader rose, his golden robes shimmering under the council's artificial lights. His expression was unreadable. The council will vote. The chamber grew silent. This was it. The moment that would decide humanity's place in the galaxy. Elias stood firm. The Krell Dominion glared in fury. The Vernari watched in silence. And then, the votes came in. One by one. Until the final count was displayed before the council. The impossible result. Humanity had won. By a single vote. The chamber erupted. Some species voiced outrage. Others stood in solemn agreement. But the decision had been made. Humanity was no longer just a new species on the galactic stage. They were now a recognized power. But as Elias took in the reactions, he did not smile. Because something felt wrong. The true cost of victory. A message flashed on Elias's personal communicator. Anonymous. Untraceable. Just a single sentence. You should have stayed beneath notice. Elias stared at the screen. Because in that moment, he understood. The Krell wanted war. The Vielith wanted control. But the Varnari? They wanted something else entirely. And now humanity had their attention. The celebration was short-lived. Humanity had won. The Grand Galactic Council had recognized them. But before the ink had dried on the official declaration, someone tried to kill Elias Carter. The attack on humanity's voice. The meeting had barely ended. The moment the council doors opened, Elias stepped into the vast corridors of the council spire, his thoughts still racing. The galaxy had mocked humanity. And yet, when the votes had been cast, they had been forced to accept them. But he had seen the faces of those who opposed it. The Krell Dominion had made their rage clear. The Vialith Empire had voted against them. The Varnari Collective had remained silent. And silent enemies were the most dangerous ones. Elias was halfway to his transport when it happened. A whisper of motion. A flicker of light reflecting off a blade. And then, the assassin struck. A blade meant to end a species. Elias barely had time to react. The shadow moved fast, faster than any human should have been able to perceive. A blade of pure energy, aimed straight for his heart. Death in less than a second. But something went wrong. The moment the blade should have pierced flesh, there was a loud crack. And the assassin was hurled backward, their body smashing against the corridor wall. A kinetic shield. Activated just in time. Elias staggered back, his heart pounding. Security forces rushed in, weapons raised. The assassin tried to flee. They almost escaped. But one of the guards, a member of humanity's own delegation, was faster. A single shot rang out. The assassin collapsed, dead before they hit the ground. And as their hood fell back, Elias's breath caught. Because the assassin wasn't Krell. Wasn't from any species that had openly opposed humanity's admission. The assassin was Varnari. The war humanity didn't see coming. The Grand Council was in uproar. An assassination attempt within the Spire was an act of war. But the Varnari Collective denied everything. A rogue agent, their delegation claimed. Not an attack sanctioned by our government. A lie. Everyone knew it was a lie. But that didn't matter. The Varnari never attacked openly. They worked from the shadows. And that meant, this was only the beginning. The Krell's challenge. As Elias recovered, another challenge arose. A formal declaration was issued by Prime Warlord Drath of the Krell Dominion. A duel. A challenge of honor. One that humanity could not refuse. The duel that would decide a species' fate. The rules were clear. The fight would be to first blood, or death. If Elias refused, humanity's reputation would be shattered. If he fought and lost, the Krell would use it to justify war. And that meant there was only one option. Elias had to fight. He had never been a soldier. He had never been in a death match. And yet, the fate of humanity rested on him. As he stepped onto the ceremonial battleground, he saw Drath waiting. The massive Krell warlord loomed over him, a hulking figure of muscle and armor. The crowd roared for blood. Elias exhaled slowly. And then as the battle began, he smiled. The arena was ancient. A sacred place, carved from the heart of the Galactic Council's oldest structure, where duels had been fought for millennia. Every species had its traditions, but among the Krell there was only one way to settle disputes with honor: combat. And now humanity had been dragged into it. The stacked odds. The air was thick with tension. Ambassador Elias Carter stood at the center of the arena, staring up at his opponent. Prime Warlord Drath. A towering 7-foot Krell, encased in dark armor, his battle scars etched into his scales like war trophies. He grinned, revealing razor-sharp teeth. You should not have come here, human. Elias cracked his neck. Didn't have a choice. A low rumble of laughter echoed through the crowd of alien dignitaries gathered in the grandstands. They had come expecting a spectacle. A massacre. They had no doubt who would win. But what they didn't realize was, neither did Elias. The rules of the duel. A holographic display flickered to life above the arena, detailing the duel's terms. Victory by first blood or death. No outside interference. No ranged weapons. Elias didn't flinch. His mind raced through everything he had read about Krell physiology, their fighting techniques, their weaknesses, if they had any. The truth? There was no winning strategy. Krell warriors were bred for war. Stronger. Faster. More durable than any human could ever hope to be. This wasn't a fight. It was a survival test. And yet, a small, unshakable part of Elias believed there was still a way, because humans always found a way. The fight begins. A loud horn sounded, signaling the start of the duel. Drath lunged forward instantly, closing the distance in less than a second. Too fast. Elias barely had time to dodge before a massive clawed fist whistled past his head, missing by inches. The shockwave of the strike sent dust spiraling into the air. The Krell didn't stop. Drath moved with terrifying speed, launching a brutal combination of strikes. Elias ducked, weaved, barely managing to stay on his feet. But one hit was all it would take. One clean strike and his body would break. Adapting to the impossible. Drath sneered, frustrated that Elias hadn't fallen yet. You can't run forever, human? Elias smirked. Don't need to. Just need you to get tired. Drath paused. A flicker of realization passed through his golden eyes. The humans weren't fighting like warriors. They were fighting like survivors. And survival was more dangerous than strength. The first cut. Elias saw his opportunity. Drath's style was relentless but also predictable. He was overconfident, like every Krell warrior who had fought and won for centuries. He expected dominance. He didn't expect adaptation. So, when Drath threw another crushing strike, Elias didn't dodge. He sidestepped at the last moment, and his own blade flashed forward. A thin crimson line appeared across Drath's wrist. The Krell warrior froze. The crowd fell into stunned silence. The first blood had been drawn. Elias had won. The moment that shook the galaxy. The realization hit the crowd all at once. A human had won. Against a Krell warlord. Something unthinkable had just happened. But then, Drath laughed. A deep, guttural sound filled with something unexpected. Respect. He raised his wounded arm, staring at the thin cut. Then he grinned. You're smarter than you look, human. The arena erupted in a mixture of cheers and outrage. The Krell had never lost in the arena before. And yet, one of their greatest warlords had just been bested. By a species they had mocked. The implications were massive. The Krell's response. Drath stepped forward, towering over Elias. For a moment, Elias braced himself, expecting a betrayal. But instead, Drath clapped a heavy hand onto his shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. You fight with strategy, not strength? He bared his teeth in a grin. I can respect that. Elias exhaled. That was all he needed. Respect. Not fear. Not dominance. Respect. Because respect changed everything. The real threat reveals itself. But while the Krell had accepted the outcome, there were others in the shadows who had not. As Elias left the arena, he knew something was wrong. Something felt off. His instincts screamed at him. And then, the explosion hit. The arena shook violently, flames erupting from the council chambers above. Guards shouted. Sirens blared. Elias hit the ground hard, the force of the blast knocking the air from his lungs. He forced himself up. His ears rang. His vision blurred. And then, through the chaos, he saw them. Vernari soldiers. Moving with deadly precision, cutting through the confusion like ghosts. This was never about the duel. This was the real attack. And now, humanity had only seconds to react. The message from the enemy. As Elias tried to regain his bearings, a holographic transmission flickered to life before him. A Vernari delegate. Come. Smiling. You should have stayed beneath notice, Ambassador. The screen cut to black. And Elias finally understood. The Vernari had never cared about the vote. They had never cared about the duel. This had always been about control. And humanity? They had just become a problem. The battle for humanity's survival. As Elias turned toward the chaos unfolding, one thing was clear. The fight wasn't over. The real war had just begun. And humanity was right in the center of it. They had wanted a voice. Now they had it. But the question was, could they survive it?